I have this head. I had in my head, this was kind of just a quick check-in briefing, but understood. So I want to do a roll call vote of the SDIC board. Tanny Stephenson,
Present.
Annalise Kohler,
Present.
and Tom Hansel is present as well. Steve Winkle is absent at this time. This meeting is being recorded. And it's really just, this is not the formal meeting. This was really just kind of a discussion with staff and MCD or SDIC board to kind of further our efforts to meet our Army Corps engineering capital construction requirements. So I'm just trying to anticipate what those needs might be as we prepare and adopt an FY24 budget, which Lori and her team is working on, I know, at this time. So I just wanted to kind of step in and kind of see where we're at and what the thinking is from the budget development side. For the record, Stephen Winkle joined the meeting. So we are we've got our full team here, which is wonderful. Stephen, this is really, I need to apologize. I wasn't trying to exclude you from this earlier meeting. It was just more of an exploratory to kind of understand how SDIC was preparing our 24 budget.
Okay.
And I regret that I will not be present at the April 25th meeting. So I just wanted to kind of insert myself and just kind of explore. Hong had reached out to me and suggested that we actually have a formal SDIC board meeting, and we did the public announcement, and thus the additional meeting invites went out.
And Chair Hansel, thank you for being willing to do that, because we had provided similar advice to the urban board and we're just trying to be consistent. So I'm really grateful for your willingness to go through the extra trouble.
Thank you, Jim. You know, this discussion today is by no means trying to undermine the urban or the work that staff is doing, trying to move a metropolitan levy system forward. I'm just carrying my hat of SDIC board member, and knowing that Bill, Colin, Jim, Lori, you have our interest in mind. I'm looking back at last year's adopted CIP, and I'm seeing some serious capital investments coming up in the FY25 year. And I just want to make sure, should we still be an operating board, we have a plan of action to meet those commitments should the urban board be not stood up and dissolution doesn't occur. I just want to be thoughtful in what this board is considering as we develop the 24 budget and what our priorities might be. So right now, I just want to kind of do it just to kind of set the stage. I'm asking for, you know, primarily the key folks on the PLMS project to kind of introduce themselves as to what their role is in delivering the SDIC portfolio of Army Corps projects. So that's the Troutdale Outlet Mall, that's the levy height increase, I believe, and the pump station. So, you know, I'll just start it off. My role is really to drive policy and set budgets to meet our financial obligations. So I'll pass it to Tanny. You're on.
Okay. So what do you want me to preface?
Yeah, how do you see your role in being SDIC preparing it to meet the Army Corps responsibilities?
Okay, I foresee my role is making sure that SDIC has a somewhat of a plan in place in addition to what's going on with the urban, to make sure that its needs somehow are met if the urban's not an option, I guess I would say.
Hand it off to somebody next.
Okay, Annalise.
Thank you. I would just flag that Sorry, I'm finding this conversation a little distressing, frankly, because I feel like our focus right now is to deliver on the plan we have before us, which is the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District and that plan. And you are right, I think, Tom and Danny, to be concerned about what happens if that doesn't go through. I think we should be focused on delivering and making sure it goes through. And frankly, if it doesn't, I don't know if I think there are a lot of other pieces that we're going to have to contend with alongside all of the other districts. And so I'm a little concerned that this conversation is happening. It doesn't really make sense to me in the context of where we ought to be focused. And if it does fall apart, then I think all 4 districts are going to need to come together and figure out what to do next. And I'm concerned about the isolation of our thinking in this moment.
Thanks, Annalise. Can you pass it to somebody? So we'll just go to Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. So being new, I'm not entirely sure I understand the full risks of what's in place with the setup of the urban group and the timing for that. I understand, obviously, like from an organization perspective, you always want to have a viable backup plan in case what you're planning for doesn't pan out. But I guess I'm not entirely knowledgeable about exactly what are the risks, timing, when will we know, and steps that are necessary here. So looking forward to listening and taking it all in.
Jim, can you go?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I'm the executive director, of course, and so we're trying to keep this all moving and try and be responsive to the various boards' interests and ultimately trying to come up with a successful way to raise capital for the system. So happy to try and facilitate and help you guys make progress. And I would turn it over to Mark.
Thanks, Jim. Mark Wilcox for Stephen's benefit. I'm the PMLS project manager, so I'm trying to help deliver all this work and advise you all on the various components. So to that end, I was going to add, Tom, there was one section you left out. There's actually an extensive section of levee widening from the pump station east to, well, about half, let's just say halfway along the northern edge of the system. So, but those are the project constituents, and we're doing our best to deliver them in the most efficient way and make sure that that the impact to the public and agencies, public landowners are minimal, and that that our needs are addressed. So I'll pass it off to Colin.
Thanks, Mark. Colin Rowan. I'm the Director of Planning and Public Affairs. I'm also the Levee Ready Columbia Program Director, heavily overlapping spheres there. And for PMLS, that came out of agreements amongst all the project partners of Levee Ready Columbia as a way to move forward as a single system. It came out of the Declaration of Cooperation that the partners signed in 2015 to move towards modernizing the way that we govern the levee system and how we operate it in the future. And so as part of that, have been on point for for PMLS, really coming up with how we bring all of these different project partners together, how we fund it both locally and then also at the federal level, how we continue advancing the work so that the federal government sees us as a really good sponsor and recipient of these federal funds. And then for the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board, that also came out of the Levee Ready Columbia effort to modernize the way that we do business, and in that sphere, how we fund it is really important. And I think, as a few of the board members have noted, how we pay for this work if a geo bond isn't successful or there's some other kind of backup. And I think we've been having conversations at the state level. There's other funding sources to be able to explore, but overall, I think just focused on how to successfully deliver this PMLS project that has really important flood safety, as well as meeting those federal regulations, benefits for our whole system. I will hand it over to Lori.
Sure. This isn't an easy answer for me because I have multiple hats in this process. So I just wrote a few notes to make sure that I'm not missing things, and there'll be like 400 other things on my list that I do for the individual districts and for the urban district, in addition to what I talk about. First and foremost, I'm here to provide transparent information to all of our boards. So that can be the individual legacy boards, and that can be the urban board, and sharing information about other districts with all of the districts has also been kind of a criteria of mine, particularly when we're looking at staffing decisions and costs and those sorts of things that are happening at the MCDD level, to make sure that everybody that's involved understands the numbers and in a way that makes sense to them, because sometimes accounting doesn't always make sense. Right now I'm working on the budgets for all of the districts and making sure that we have a reasonable plan that will help us to move forward in the next year. And in doing that, really identifying the financial risks. So SDIC is pretty stable right now when you look at kind of where we're looking at numbers next year, but the other districts are not. So not being alarmist and not giving you any new information, but the other 3 legacy districts are pretty much running out of cash. And so, which was one of the kind of one of the pieces of the decision making when we started talking about creating this consolidated district, is that we really need to stabilize the funding mechanism, and we need to stabilize the finances so that that all of the districts can provide us integrated system of flood protection for this area. So identifying those financial risks is important as well. Compliance is important. So making sure that we have systems in place, making sure that if we've got federal funding, that our processes and procedures are compliant with that is critical with this project. Getting the forecast done for the urban district, listening to the variety of comments that I'm getting from the from many board members, and trying to integrate that into a forecast that feels reasonable and helps that board move forward with the consolidation is a really critical part of my role at this point, as well as just planning for the combination of all those districts and what do we need to do, on the ground to make that happen. So there's lots of balls in the air, and I'm just trying to make sure that you all have the information that you need to make those hard decisions and to move things forward. So that's my role. And I don't know who hasn't gone.
Bill.
Oh, Armand hasn't gone.
Armand and Bill and Wendy.
Thanks, Lori. Armand Russell Spots, Associate District Counsel. I'm here to support the Legacy Board's wide-ranging legal needs, including SDIC, in conjunction with Brian's role as counsel, especially as it relates to system-wide projects like the PMLS. And with respect to this work right now, I'm working with Mark on almost a daily basis, and other staff on the miscellaneous contracting needs, real estate, environmental work related to the PMLS. And I'll pass it over to Bill.
Thanks, Armand. Bill Owen, I'm Director of Engineering and Operations at the district and the Chief Engineer. Simply put, my role is to track and understand what flood risks exist in the district, and to ensure that the board understands what future capital needs and operational needs it needs to invest in order to minimize the risk to the degree they feel comfortable doing. And so I have a large role in developing the capital improvement plan and tracking the capital portfolio moving forward once the approved budgets are set. And so has been my job, and I intend to expect that will continue to be my job as PMLS and the other bond related work move forward. And I guess with that, Wendy, I guess we haven't bounced it to you yet, so go ahead and add your.
Don't forget Brian.
And Brian, thanks.
I'm Wendy Lynn. I'm the board coordinator, and my job is to help the board comply with public meeting law and facilitate getting you the information you need for board meetings. Brian.
Hey, thanks, Wendy. So yeah, Brian Sheets, legal counsel for SDIC and representing SDIC's legal interest and providing advice to the board, and definitely liaising with the MCDD legal team, Hong and Armand, and just making sure that SDIC's interests are represented legally. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So I just want to circle back. Annalise, I did address, in my agenda, political policy implications, and this, maybe we'll just start there. I'm not trying to circumvent, undermine. Tanny is our representative on the urban board. I attend every urban board meeting I'm available to. I am actively supporting that, I think, wholeheartedly. I'm just trying, and if this group says, don't have a plan B, that's a discussion we need to have. If the optics are, we are weakening the urban, let's talk about that. And that's what I'm hoping this discussion unfolds. Should we just put all of our focus on the urban and just look at a 12-month horizon for the SDIC budget? Or are we kind of running in parallel tracks of the urban, supporting the urban and the what if? And that's where I'm struggling. So comments from board on that, or validation or concerns?
No, I really appreciate that, Tom, and I appreciate that perspective, and certainly understand the importance of a plan B. I think I am concerned because we are doing that in isolation of the other boards. So we are forming a plan B without having, I think, a lot of additional information. I think hopefully we do not need this plan B. I think that's all what we want, but I think we need to address that when we arrive at that. And I am concerned about not knowing a whole host of factors that we will probably know in a year or so when we might need a plan B. And instead we are going through an exercise that while it might make us feel better to have a plan B, will not be grounded in the reality of what is in front of us. So I think it feels a little like we're creating something that is not grounded in future reality because we do not know what that future reality is. Does that make sense?
It does. And that was one of my talking points for today, to kind of flesh out the political policy implications, is what should be our communication plan in, venturing down this path, right? And I would rely on Jim. Thank you for having your hand up, Jim. Guide us, that I don't want to be seen as, rogue by any means, but we're in budget season, and this is paramount that we do this now, and especially to help Lori kind of understand, the various options perhaps that we have to approach these next couple months, years, until dissolution occurs. Jim?
Well, first, I think I want to reiterate your sort of approach here, Tom. When you and I spoke, what was it, 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago, you were concerned about potential delays and wanting to find a way to see if SDIC could support ongoing movement of the project. So I just want to reiterate your intent. I think I just wanted to pose one question here for the group. There's the sort of stand up of the urban and the operating revenue component of that, which obviously there's some ongoing work that needs to happen there to make that work. But then there's also the capital side, which I think is what you're focused on. And so I think the stand up of the urban and the capital bond are related but separable, because the urban bond can be referred prior to the stand up of formal operating revenue of the district. So I just wanted to flag that for everyone, because maybe that helps focus the conversation on the capital side if that's where you're headed.
Yeah, I'm just looking at our SDIC CIP, And there's some hurdles out there, and we do not have the resources to meet our obligations in 25. If the CIP is accurate, you know, but I think that doesn't, the 1.447 million that we're asked to provide in 25, I don't think that includes the Army Corps money. I think that's, or it does it. So these are the details I'm trying to get down to so Lori understands what our SDIC's obligations for 25, 26 with Army Corps federal dollars, and what's our capacity to issue financing until we are dissolved. Because I don't know, Lori, if you have all those answers, this discussion will be really short.
We
but I'm just
definitely
trying
don't.
to-
I think it might be worth Colin going through a little bit of how the Corps views this and some of the challenges of parsing out costs by individual district. We visited this before around the initial conversations around cost allocation for PED, and we struggled there, but maybe a reiteration of some of those challenges and how the Corps is packaging up some of the work that makes it a little bit risky for all of us to separate it out. Colin, do you want to, is that useful now? I want to make sure the board gets what it wants, rather than staff talking at you. And I also want to acknowledge there's a lot of staff here, but it's because each of these folks has kind of a key handle on portions of it. So please, board, tell us to shut up if you need to talk. We want to give you space here.
Annie, Stephen, Annalise, any comments?
No, I think we're pretty much, you know, I think we're going on the right track here. I think we need to know what our obligations are and, you know, how we can fulfill those as best we can.
I don't
So
have
I think
any
it's sort of useful to sort of understand what might be required to try and identify a specific obligation for SDIC. So Colin, do you want to describe that? That's my idea, but again, we have a lot of really thoughtful, smart people here.
I can go ahead and do that. Yeah, and please jump in, board members, with any questions. But so my understanding, I guess, of this request is part of the Plan B would be to advance portions of the projects that are identified in your capital CIP that are part of PMLS independently of the Corps' process or in advance of the Corps' process. And so I can briefly provide sort of a, I guess, core funding philosophy, but also with some of the complications that Jim noted. So the Corps sees this as one system, and that's not just based on individual, you know, 4 separate districts operating as one. It's based on really how they can get to what's called the benefit cost ratio. And it is that in order to get the federal funding, for them to find federal interest in funding this project, it has to provide these regional and actually national economic development benefits, which is basically to say that it can't just be a job or a thing that leaves Portland and moves over to Vancouver or even moves to New York City. It would be that losing this thing would have national economic development impact. It would go somewhere else or it wouldn't happen at all. And so really key to that analysis is the functioning of the whole system. And that is why Penn 1, Penn 2, SDIC, MCDD are all in together because of all of the different economic pieces, the critical infrastructure that's happening across those different systems, and they all interplay. So from the Corps' process, they aren't separable, right? Like you can't spin off one. The other complication is on efficiencies in design and funding in general. And so the Corps, for the next phase that this project goes into, the pre-construction engineering design phase, 3.5 years, that is will be focused, probably 1 or 2 large engineering firms will be the contractor to the Corps on this, and they will be doing all of these projects with the Corps, with our design input and a lot of support from our staff as a package. And so there's really, the costs that we can spin out or separate for individual projects are only relevant when we're discussing the entire project, if that makes sense. So you have these efficiencies and costs going across the whole system for design. And then, to be frank, there's also inefficiencies in some of the construction costs because of the dollars needing to be federalized and the contractors needing to work through the federal process. Any of the projects that either anyone does independently would still have to go through that same process so that we would get the in-kind credit. So I guess the key there is that, especially in this next 3.5 year phase, the design phase, the reason why we arrived at the equal split, the 25% split for those design costs, is because they're just designing it as a package, and those projects will then be constructed independently, or at least in different phases. The first phase of the project is also important, I guess, to SDIC in particular, that they're going to be moving forward with pump stations and projects that are on the east side, most likely. And that's not a final word, and maybe Mark can add a little more context there, but they're looking at it in 3 phases, basically starting with pump stations and the projects in the east, and then effectively moving westward. Yeah, and
that's a good characterization, Colin. I think for this conversation.
Yeah, and so I guess given that, and given how we would actually staff any of those projects moving forward independently, and I can't speak, Lori would have to speak to SDIC's financial ability to move any of those things independently, but it would definitely benefit the project overall. It would benefit the ability for the districts to be compensated by the federal dollars to keep it as part of a package, and it would absolutely benefit the overall capacity to deliver the full project. So to not draw down any of our capacity for independent projects that we wouldn't be able to rely on all of the Corps' design teams and as well as their contract design teams. And I think that is a different conversation than other Plan Bs that we're discussing, and it's more at the urban board, again, approaching this from a systems approach and approaching it as a full kind of need to make large investments, not just in the levee system, but also in the conveyance and pumping systems, which is looking especially to the state. And right now, we at least have the plan to ask for a significant portion of the PMLS project to be funded by the state. And that's not, Annalisa would know, it's not an easy ask, but capital funding for something that does have pretty direct benefit to overall state funding, everything from payroll to the actual, export sector type traded sector goods that happen behind the levee. It is something that at least we can make a compelling case at the state level for additional funding. So there's a few other plans that we need for overall funding, and everything, if a GEO bond didn't go forward, everything funding wise would need to go through that sort of Plan B process, and then we would do work that we're able to afford with Bill's direction on risk analysis and prioritizing those projects at the highest risk as he would lay out in the CIPs.
Colin, thanks for the reminder that this was one system seen by the Army Corps, but I think I recall conversations that there was capacity to break out the construction by district, because right now my authority is under statute to manage the SDIC boundaries. Our attorney reminds us, the residents or our constituents inside our boundary have to receive a benefit from the investments that they make or from their assessments. So I would appreciate, from the MCDD staff, how do we hold true to that obligation that our assessments will be going towards the benefit of their properties until such time the urban stands in, right? So it's that middle ground is where I'm just not clear. And I think to understand, you know, our CIPs, I'm seeing that as a directive. We are expected to come up with 1.4 and 25, 1.3 and 26. So that's what we've accepted. There's no, you know, doesn't say anything that the urban starts here, you know, so that's where I'm just little trying to understand, how do we develop our assessments for next year? The message to our constituents, this is the path we're on. So it's just, we're in this middle, I call it middle ground, you know, it's like, I need to understand what are we tasked with, and when do we just pass the baton to the urban? And not knowing, that's where I'm just nervous about that, not knowing when the baton is going to pass, right? So I need that, so help me, and I think the other board members, how do we, you know, even if the urban doesn't stand up, how does the SDIC district put into whatever the formula is, you know, there has to be some model that is equitable to SDIC properties, right? Magnitude of projects, et cetera. Go ahead,
Tom,
Jim.
I think the idea would be that we would have a district-wide capital bond passed, and the bond would be responsible for funding all of that activity. So again, the urban district doesn't necessarily have to have permanent stable operating revenue to refer a bond. And so our goal remains to get that referred. And again, we will remain to wait until the voters render their verdict, but in May of 24, or potentially November of 24, leaning towards May currently with approval of the board. Now there's work to do, but again, the urban doesn't necessarily have to be set up for us to have a different source of capital funding. So I just want to keep those two issues potentially separated.
And the PMLS projects, it's a straight line as far as direct benefits to SDIC landowners. So I don't think that has any challenges. The pump station is in your drainage master plan, identified as being needed to be replaced. The levee system right behind it, the head wall, doesn't meet current safety standards. Doing a fragility analysis of the levee, basically from the pump station out to Sundial Road, it didn't meet current safety standards for a direct benefit for everyone in SDIC. And then there is a gap in the system, basically down by the outlet mall, that also poses a risk to SDIC landowners. So you're clear inside there, but as far as all of those independent PMLS projects have direct benefits, but additively is why it's a federally authorized project.
So thanks, Colin. Jim, you mentioned the bonding, you know, so should SDIC not assume we have any additional liability? We're just going to let our undesignated reserves roll into the urban, or do we continue to build our undesignated reserves and start to reserve them towards the Army Corps projects? Because right now I see in a lot of presentations, SDIC is showing a little over $1 million in undesignated funds. But I've always assumed that million plus was directed towards our capital needs. So Lori, maybe I'm not tracking, but when I see that million undesignated, Tanny, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is designated for our capital obligations.
The undesignated reserve has not been designated by the board for a specific purpose. And part of that reason is to give you flexibility in budgeting to be able to determine whether you need that money to fund operations or whether you need that money to fund capital. Right now, the budget is still a little bit of a moving target, so I can't share the numbers, but what I can tell you is right now, the proposed budget has a 0 increase to rate because that is what the board directed me to do. I will be bringing forth to the board information on what each 1% in rate increase will give you in an estimation. what it's looking like right now is that with a 0% rate increase, you are more than covering all of your projected costs for next year. You've got a net income, which isn't a term we usually use in government entities, but you are spending less than you're bringing in with your revenues for next year. The capital reserve is going down a little bit in the 24 budget because of the dollars that are committed towards the PMLS funding. So a good portion of that funding is coming from the Business Oregon grants, but there is a piece that is the districts itself. So that money is coming out of the reserve, but there's still, in comparison to the other districts, a relatively healthy undesignated reserve that's sitting in the budget because you're operating with a little bit more revenue coming in than what you're spending.
And then I think the remaining assets at the call for dissolution are going to be subject to a process where decisions get made with input from the legacy boards, but the urban board ultimately makes the decisions about how to allocate any remaining reserves among the legacy districts. We're attempting to factor the dissolution work plan into our existing capacity, and we've identified an outside law firm that's going to support that work, with Lori taking the lion's share on, because it's all about assets. So we're going to think that through, Tom, but that I think is a question that all the legacy boards have in terms of whatever remaining assets are existing. How do you maintain that connection to the previous statutory authority that generated those revenues in the first place? And we don't have that figured out, but we know it's an important topic. I know Hong's probably done the most thinking about it so far.
Danny, you have any comment?
Go ahead. I'll wait just a second here.
So thank you, Lori. So what I hear Lori saying is we're budgeting with a high confidence that dissolution is going to happen soon. So I just want to raise, by taking a 0 increase on our assessments, we're on a path to dissolution, which is wonderful. But if there is a ripple and that gets delayed, we have a positive cash flow next year, our net balance increases. But if we did an assessment increase, we might be better prepared for our financial hurdles, capital hurdles in 25 and 26 if we take an assessment increase. So that's kind of all I want to elevate. And that, Lori, thanks for the reminder that you have an order of 0 increase, that we're spending down or attempting to spend down. Doesn't sound like we are, but I'm just nervous about the CIP timeline is coming up rapidly. So if there's a delay in our dissolution, I just want to make sure we have a plan B to meet our financing. Colin, you're just going to say, the cost is, and we have it in the bank, or we're going out for financing. So
I think there's a little bit of a different question about SDIC's ongoing capital needs post, a delayed urban startup than there is about SDIC funding the local share of the PMLS. So there are 2 different issues there, I think, because the PMLS local match will either be funded by a successful bond measure or it won't. If we're unsuccessful with the bond, I think we will struggle collectively to advance the PMLS without state help or a secondary run at the voters. In terms of SDIC's capital needs, should you remain in existence in addition to the PMLS, I think that's a different question that we can definitely try and help you with. But I'm a little worried that they're getting mixed because they're really different political challenges, honestly.
And then there's a bit of a strategy question too, and we haven't come forth with the urban district with our proposal for revenues and what we're thinking in that arena, because we're still really working with Eco Northwest and with legal outside counsel to try to evaluate, like, what do we think is the best recommended approach. But I would, if I were sitting in your chair, I would be wanting to make sure that I evaluate the impact of those recommendations too for your residents in your district, because we're looking at some options that would possibly continue the assessments, but at an increased rate that is going to impact all of the property owners. And so do you want to go into a potential rate impact like that after having increased your own rates for a couple of years? I think so it becomes a very complicated question, particularly for your district where you're sitting at a pretty balanced level right now and are really charging your landowners what you need for your current operations, which seems like an appropriate place for you to be. And I understand your nervousness about looking forward, but knowing what I know behind the scenes, I'm also nervous about hitting them with an increase and then coming back around with the urban district and hitting them again, because that is going to put them at a little bit of a disadvantage. So just something to consider. And I know you don't have all that information, but it's something that wakes me up at 2 a.m. when I start to think about like, what are all the puzzle pieces and how do we put this together? And I think if I were sitting in your shoes, I would be hesitant to do much of an increase to your rates this year, because I see what we may be proposing in future years.
And then I think on the PMLS, if the bond fails or is delayed, we're going to be looking at a system-wide alternative approach. And then if there are additional capital needs that would accrue to SDIC, we can go to the Drainage Master Plan and the current CIP and try and tease those out for you in your budget presentation. But I think trying to separate out an SDIC approach to funding the local match is going to prove very complicated and challenging. But I think getting a closer look at your potential CIP needs outside of that makes a lot of sense. And I think we probably have the ability to do that. I don't mean to say it's not possible to have an SDIC contribution to keep your end of the PMLS going. I just think it's there are a lot of implications of trying to do that potentially impact other districts and so on. So we might need to just do a little more thinking or ask them what they think about it. I also don't think that you're alone in having these questions, Tom. So it's useful for you to pose these for us and get us thinking about them. So I want to acknowledge that as well. They're very realistic and good questions to be asking.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Lori. So again, my concern is if the bonding doesn't pass, I want to make sure that SDIC is positioned to be, we're united to the urban's cause. I don't understand how it's going to be a shared cost possibly to meet the commitments of the PMS obligations. I don't understand what formula that would be, but I just want to make sure that SDIC Properties understands we are prepared to move forward to meet our PLMS commitments, but based on the policy of the political direction, we really want to stay united and it's one for all. I think our finances are strong. We have a good property base to take on these challenges of meeting our obligations. I just want to be messaged that way, that we are financially capable. Whenever I hear that SDIC cannot meet our financial challenges, I disagree mentally, because I think we are prepared on a prudent CIP, 20-year CIP plan. We can't do it all at the same time, but our finances are such that we can take on financing with these federal dollars to leverage. So I just want to make, again, I'm just wearing an SDIC hat. Tammy's our urban representative. I cannot, and Annalise, you're on Pen 1 as well, right? So you've got multiple hats as well, but I just want to make sure SDIC, if the bonding doesn't happen, what's next, right? That's why I just want to make sure we're positioned, and I don't want to convey SDIC wasn't prepared to meet its financial commitments, because that's I do not want to hear that statement that we were unprepared. we aligned with the partners is what I'm hearing is what we're proposing to stay united in order to meet a metropolitan levy system necessity to meet the Army Corps' expectations. So it's that communication. I just want to make sure Amazon, the FedEx, that they understand that independently we were ready, but collectively we're still getting organized. I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking at this meeting. My apologies, but I'm just sensitive to another budget season, and it's, to me, a budget is not a 12-month horizon, it's a 5-year horizon. And that's what I would like to be dissolved in 18 months, but if it's not happening, every action of adoption of a budget is, a missed opportunity. So.
And I think you're right, Tom. I mean, in normal circumstances, a budget process is a 5-year horizon. What's difficult for us with this one is we sort of have to move forth with our planning, having a little bit of faith that that geo bond is going to pass, because if it doesn't, we got to replan. Like, no one has the money to be able to stand up our share of the PMLS project if we don't have that geo bond funding. And that's where we've started talking about what are our alternatives for the system as a whole to be able to continue that local match. But where we stand right now, without state support, I think it would be very difficult for us to move forward with that funding commitment, that local match funding commitment for PMLS when they start down into the construction phase. I think that when I look at the numbers that Mark is sharing with me with all the projections, and obviously as the Corps moves through their planning process, those numbers are just going to get bigger. But right now, the 2-year horizon, I feel pretty secure. Like, I feel like we can get it together and make sure that everybody is doing their local match during the planning process. When we start in construction, all bets are off. And that's when we really need to have a plan B and know what we're going to do system wide. I think we can get through the planning, even if we are not successful in May of 2024 with the geo bond and need to go to November, which is where our pollsters are telling us we really need to be based upon, historical results and how all of this stuff, all this strategy stuff works. I think even if we had to go out for the second round to get approval, we're still in a place financially that we could gather enough local support to be able to make our match requirements in the 24-25 season. Operationally, we're in a pretty difficult position in 3 of our districts. You all are doing just fine. So we'll have to look at how do we bolster some operational support, and what sort of kind of tightening of the belt can we do in our other districts to make sure that we can keep this going if we're pushed out another year. So I really feel like this plan B sort of discussion is important, but we probably don't have all of the information that we need at this point in time to have that discussion. And I feel pretty confident that for 23-24 and 24-25, that we can keep this going and make sure that we meet our commitments for the match. It's in that 4th year that it gets a little bit challenging. And I see Mark has his hand up and he has better information than I do. So I'm going to stop talking.
Just real quick, what I think I heard you say, Lori, is that even though SDIC is fiscally healthy and could generate the financing to pay its share of the local match, the other districts won't be capable. Therefore, we can't sign the agreements going forward.
That's correct.
Okay. Sorry, Mark.
Just trying to process what you just heard. So, but just to speak to just kind of a general reminder in terms of, in the event that that the transition doesn't happen as quickly, I think it's just important to remember that the good news is we secured this Business Oregon grant that covers the bulk of the first 2 years. Actually, it covers an incredibly,
the full,
that I'm working off of pull the string, the old talking points, but looking at the numbers more recently, it extends into the 3rd year as well. And so that a lot of the costs are covered for not just SDIC, but the remaining districts. So if we have to wait a year to go back to the ballots on the GEO bond, I think we're going to be in good shape to continue the progress on the PMLS, which I also just, as the project manager, I just want to remind you all, and sorry, Bill, in terms of overall CIP versus, this project is dealing with our biggest existential crisis technically. So I just have to put that little reminder in there in terms of what happens if the Columbia rears its ugly head and or we have a significant internal drainage. We need to get that out. And so this project really addresses those things. And in terms of just overall contingencies with respect to the bigger project, I think that we have a lot of some of these things that we've talked about over the last 20 minutes that we can reach back to. But in a very worst case scenario, the good news for SDIC is that all of your projects are essentially dealing with high priority, high risk, I guess for better or for worse. You have levee deficiencies and a pump station, a need to rebuild a pump station that are not likely to be prioritized out should the Corps need to de-scope some of the overall project. I hope that makes sense. Like if our funding does fall through in a worst case scenario, the Corps might have, and we may have to sit with the Corps and re-rack the overall total project cost and scope in order to make it work within whatever financial considerations we have if we don't secure a GEO bond. I hope that isn't the case. I think it's going to be pretty compelling to get a GEO bond, but in the event that that does happen and we have to de-scope, there are elements in other districts that would probably come before SDIC. So I guess I just want to emphasize that SDIC is in a good position to still get the most out of the project for its self-interests, notwithstanding, I think, the fact that we all benefit from looking at it as a whole system. So I'll just leave it at that. And if you have other questions, please let me know. But I think it's important to stress these items.
Mark, the 3 PMLS projects in SDIC are not required for accreditation. Is that true?
Actually, 3 out of 4 that are not technically on the list of currently identified accreditation projects. However, the vulnerabilities that are identified on the north side from Sundial Road to the pump station, having that new information, if we were to move forward and look for accreditation, it would most likely sort of become a FEMA accreditation problem, if that makes sense.
That would be for the next certification effort, though, correct?
I don't know. That would have to be
correct.
addressed now. We have a known deficiency. We have a low spot. We have an insufficient levy. So, yeah, it just wasn't caught by that last round of things. And Pen 1, Pen 2, and MCDD all had little surprises, that also added to their list. But yeah, no, those are perimeter issues and they're very critical. So they need to be addressed.
And it wasn't that, and I think it's important to stress why working with the Army Corps of Engineers, who sets the regulations, is really important, is that the levy certification work we did was excellent, but it's what's called deterministic. Does it meet a factor of safety? It has to be 1.3 or higher. The Corps was able to do a much more sophisticated analysis, probability-based analysis, and that's what identified that additional fragility on the levee. So it was excellent to be able to leverage that additional technical support from the Corps, and it is something that we need to address.
I want to recognize the time, trying to finish up as close as we can to 11. Jim, Lori, thank you for your clarification. It's good to know, and I think it's important as much as we can message that SDIC, I mean, what I heard is we actually are prepared to meet our financial obligations for our capital needs, financing plans. So that was important. And that makes me feel good that our planning 8 years ago to make some changes with our assessments has played out. And, you know, the establishment of the new ORS, great. You know, I'm passing the baton in a good, healthy, financial healthy position, which is positive. I just want to allow Tanny, Stephen, or Annalise any closing comments.
None for me, thank you.
Tom, I'll just reiterate, thank you for asking these questions and trying to think ahead and helping us do that. Appreciate it, and appreciate your having all these folks here so they could help, you know, provide the right answers. And so we appreciate all your time, and I've benefited from your advice. So thank you.
Again, I want to echo that. I appreciate that. A couple follow-up things for me that have come out of this meeting, though. One would be, we're looking at doing some construction for the 40-mile loop on that section of the levee. It sounds like the same section that is going to need to be repaired. Is that going to affect construction of that loop that's scheduled to happen this year?
No, that is not. And we've connected with the Port of Portland and the Army Corps on that. And so it is green light, move ahead with that trail project, and the Corps replaces in kind if there is any damage that takes place on that multi-use path. But otherwise, a lot of the work is actually going to be on the landward side of the levee. Not so much, it's not building levee up, it's building levee out is the way to think about that. But all good on that 40-mile loop, and the Corps wants all those types of projects to move ahead as planned.
Okay. And I think SDIC is pretty financially sound right now. You know, obviously things are going to happen if the bond doesn't pass. I think that's going to be a big issue for all of us. And I would say that Urban's probably going to be 25 before it's calling for dissolution instead of 24. Just my opinion. Thank you.
Or we're going to get real lucky.
So before we close, Tanny, was that in? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I just had one action item I wrote down. Annalise brought up communication and messaging. Jim, staff, however you think, you know, I don't want this meeting to be, oh, SDIC is plotting or SDIC is doing a plan B without anybody knowing. So Jim, if however you want to introduce that we are having discussions, we had this meeting, and it sounds like other boards may be doing the same. My intent is not, I want this to be a transparent discussion and remaining united to the cause of the Urban's formation. So
understood. Understood and heard, and we will respond accordingly and going forward.
Any ideas how we might communicate that, or what's the thought process there?
Are there particular folks that you want to hear that? We can certainly bring it up at format, and we can talk about it at the Urban, that you guys were looking for a plan B and trying to offer a way to use your relatively healthy finances to stage things if we could figure it out. Are there other places we can do some more thinking about it too? I haven't been hearing a big hue and cry about SDIC recently. So
what to me, it sounds like plan B is not needed. That's what my takeaway is here.
Not yet.
I think it's deferred.
It's deferred. Yeah.
Okay, so we opened a discussion to start talking about a plan B. The action was stand down until later, right?
Let's see if we can get this bond passed, and then if we can't, then I think we need to pull everyone together and figure out what's next. But trying to do it by individual district creates some additional complexities that are difficult with the Corps.
And I just want to note that part of the plan B is also part of the plan A. I plan on working with Mark Landauer, our state lobbyist, to advance a request for state capital funding, even with a successful bond measure. We have a good case, and they might say no, or they might not fund everything that we want, but I think we do need to move ahead. So part of plan B is also part of plan A.
And I'll vouch for Colin that we've already talked to Mark Landauer, our lobbyist, about it. And we're starting to take steps to soften the ground for the long session in 25.
Wendy, you're reminding me about time.
Oh, yes, and also just briefly saying, we did run out of time at the last format. So at the April meetings, each board will be receiving an update on the Flood Safe Columbia River initiative at their individual meetings. And so I know, Tom, you attend those meetings, but we wanted to make sure that all the legacy districts were getting information about what direction we're going in terms of that public outreach and engagement.
And then we are working with outside counsel to analyze potential operating revenue alternatives that are technically, politically, financially, and legally feasible. We don't have that work yet. We hope to get some initial work product later this week. We continue to work with our political team on providing additional details to the board about the bond. So they'll be seeing more of that, not tomorrow, but I guess not tomorrow, but not their next meeting, but the one following. So we are making slow, steady progress. And for Tanny, we are close to having a draft revised operating forecast for your consideration, but we have some more internal work to do to make sure we're not bringing you something that we're going to need to mess with later. So hopefully early May, you'll have that, and probably a little bit of, side conversations trying to make sure we're aligned with some of the key board members. But I think you'll see that it's very responsive to the feedback we heard from the board. That's our objective. So much lower number.
Recognize the time again. I just want to appreciate everybody's time today and discussion. It was helpful for me. Hopefully others benefited as well.
Keep asking questions, Tom. They help.
Let's go ahead and adjourn the SDIC March 28th meeting. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.